Now, even before the Anti-Homosexuality Bill was passed by Parliament, there was protracted controversy and concerns about the impact it would have on the country's standing. Now, joining me in the studio this evening is Nicholas Opio, an advocate with Chapter 4 Uganda, Civil Liberties Uganda. Welcome to NTV.
Well, thank
Nicholas,
you very much.
it's great to have you. We'll start by your own reaction of the Anti-Homosexuality Bill. What do you think?
Well, I do think that there's a moral panic in this country, a moral panic that seeks to impose upon everybody else a dominant moral value. That moral panic is being instigated by what I think are Christian and cultural fundamentalists. It's a Christian driven debate, and I think that that debate today, what we saw on the floor of the House, carried the day. But I think that the entire process seems to have taken everybody by surprise, including the entire country. Nobody knows how to react, and because we thought that this debate had been suspended pending, many other consultative processes, but we were wrong. And today, Parliament, in what is supposed to be normally its last sitting of the year, passed this law. I'm
particularly intrigued by the way it was referred to as the Christmas gift. That's a story for another day. Now, there are concerns about the bill being passed without quorum. Could these provide grounds for a legal challenge?
There have been, I think, in my view, a populist grandstanding by individuals in Parliament, including Madam Speaker herself. When she returned from a conference in Canada, she promised Ugandans last year, that this law would be a Christmas gift. So I think there is some grandstanding, some sort of playing to the gallery, and I think that in that process they forgot about processes, forgot about procedures, forgot about concerns. Remember, this bill had a lot of debate, had a lot of controversies about it. And so there's no attempt to seek consensus, no attempt to follow procedure, and I think that that has left Parliament open to challenge in courts of law. And I think that if they do so, as you heard Honorable Fox-Odoi saying, that challenge will make the law null and void.
All right. Now, as expected, of course, there is international outcry. Just looking at some of the online responses, it's definitely made headlines in some of the online press. What do you think are the implications of this bill, both locally and internationally?
Well, first, I think that this bill declares criminal a huge section of our society who have a different sexual orientation. Makes all of us moral policemen and women of our own brothers and sisters. The bill requires that you and I must report to the authorities if we think somebody is gay.
Failure to do
and if
so,
you don't do that, you actually become a criminal yourself. So it makes us moral police. It creates a moral police. It's a moral terror to many Ugandans. And I think that for people who are professionals like teachers, doctors, lawyers, who hold confidential client information, will now have to do away with confidential client information in as far as this law is concerned. But I also think that internationally, this law is not just a domestic affair. I think that for the entire nation of Uganda, it's a foreign policy, it has foreign policy implications. And I think that the president will have to tread very carefully about how he will respond to this bill, because it has serious foreign policy implications on Uganda. Remember that there's now a global movement to recognize the equality of people irrespective of their sexual orientation. There's an inherent human right of equality, the right to self-determination, and the right to privacy. And I think that we have just by just this act in Parliament this afternoon dealt a huge blow to civil liberties in Uganda and I think across the world.
Do you think that, I do remember that there was a time that some of the Western governments even threatened to cut aid to Uganda. Do you think that if the president assents to this bill, that something like that could actually happen?
I do think that the president will summon his reason and look at the implication of assenting to the law on the country Uganda, and perhaps not assent to the law. My sense is he will not. But if he does so, I think that at the macro level, there are going to be relational problems between countries that view this as a more progressive idea and Uganda. I mean, the church is already divided. Church in the US, in Uganda, are now divided. So I think that there's going to be a huge fallout. But also I think at the micro level, individuals who have been pushing for this law and really becoming homophobic have felt the impact of their statements. Several small individuals now don't go abroad, do not go for studies, and then have had to face humiliation because of their stance that has been described as kill the gay. So I think that it has a huge national implication, but also individual implications on members of parliament, or members of civil society organizations, and all of us who live and work in this country, and who perhaps sometimes interact with many Western governments. Yeah.
Finally, the Prime Minister was one of the strongest opposers to this bill. Do you think this is his personal opinion, or is it a stand of the government?
Well, first remember that this bill is a private member's bill that was moved by the Honorable David Bahati. It was not a government bill, and therefore government was not instrumental in its enactment in Parliament. But as I said before, this caught government by surprise, because for a very long time I think that the state had prevailed over the mover of this bill and prevailed over the Speaker to think carefully how this discussion should be had in Uganda. But also, as we watched this afternoon, this bill was not on the order paper. The Speaker, somewhat using her powers, got this bill on the order paper. So that tells you how government was not prepared to debate this bill. Government was not prepared. There was no state position on the floor of the House, and that's why the Prime Minister, very unusually, that the Prime Minister is the one asking for quorum. Normally he's the one defending that there's quorum. So now he's the one saying there's no quorum. And I think that an issue about quorum coming from the government side, coming from the Prime Minister, is a credible thing that must be taken seriously, because normally the Prime Minister, even if there are no numbers, we don't seek to use those numbers. So I think that that has really dented this law. I think that the grandstanding, the populism by people in Parliament, I think really responding to religious pressure. I think that the Pentecostal movement in this country have done a lot of campaign to ensure that this law is passed. No wonder when the law was passed, the background music was Christian.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I've been talking to Nicholas Opio, the advocate with Chapter 4 Uganda Civil Liberties. We'll move on now.